Okay, I'm going to try again. I don't know if the last video started or not, but I'm in China broadcasting on Facebook Live, so there is a chance that I'll just go poof with my Wi-Fi. I thought I would give some responses to Trump's pulling out of the International Climate Change Accord. Some of these remarks I have been giving recently in the last several days while I was in Norway, speaking at Norrköping as well as ONS, and today on BBC. So instead of just sort of like deliriously ranting, which I could because I'm so tired, I literally just landed, I'm going to avoid just sort of ranting about how evil Trump is and what a party pooper he is and how nonsensical all this is. I'm going to actually give you some of the remarks that I've been saying to people that are more focused on tangible things that are happening around the world, and also what you can do as an individual or somebody who's a champion in an organization or local government. So it's not that I'm going to be very positive, but I'm going to be tangible. Because, you know, my Facebook stream is just like delirious ranting, and that doesn't make me feel good, so I can't imagine it making other people feel good. So the last few days, I literally just landed back a few hours ago from Oslo through Amsterdam, and I was invited to speak at Norrköping by Birgit Liodin. And it was a wonderful experience. The first thing that I did was I spoke about managing disruption in a mindful manner. And I talked a lot about China, but more importantly, in that speech, I talked about what I think is the one secret to managing disruption in industries like shipping that so clearly are calling for disruption. It's not just that the disruption is happening to them. They're asking, how do you do it internally in a mindful manner? And I basically said we need to inject more feminine energy into these industries, into the organization, as well as bring it out of yourself. And I gave some very, very tangible ways that companies can encourage more feminine energy. But one of the things that I said in the next keynote, the day after, on, what did I talk about? China's Green Rise, which that's sort of my normal shtick. I talked about how my career at JUCCCE has basically exactly matched the greening of China from 2006 and 2007. That was really the beginning of when China started going green and investing in renewables in a heavy way, and up till now. And I said a few things which, you know, interesting enough, when I say these things, I'm always surprised that people are surprised that they haven't heard these things. But I think, you know, China has so many barriers to communication. One is the language, right? They just don't do a lot of English language press that isn't just some China expert like myself, I guess, translating it into English. And number two, because we don't use Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and Instagram and all these Medium, HuffPo, etc. You know, we're just not communicating these messages about what China is doing to go green in Western media effectively. So wherever I go, whatever country, it's always shocking to me. Really, it's shocking to me that people still think China's just polluting willy-nilly and really doesn't care about the environment. So, you know, Trump is one thing, but you should really worry about China. Well, so I'm just going to give you some facts, and it might be a little overload of facts, so I'll try to give it in drips. But, you know, the first most important thing is that China has decoupled our energy use with economic growth. We have so the reason why that's important is because historically, as you grow economically, GDP grows, you use more and more energy because we're based on an industrial civilization. So for a country like China to be able to, I would show you the graphs, but I'm not quite sure how to do that with Facebook Live. But, you know, for China to do that in a significant way is really unbelievable. The only regions that I know of that have really done that well is California, which is a state, not a country, and then Sweden, which is a country but it's not as big as China, obviously. So, I mean, there might be other countries by now that have done that, but for China to be able to decouple energy use and economic growth is really phenomenal. It really shows that they have conscientiously figured out how to do this, and they're continuing to work on it. So that's number one. I'm going to see what the other one is. You know, again, people in China know this, but China is really run like a company, like a multinational corporation. We have business plans, we have HR departments, we have like a board, we have chairmen and CEOs. So the 5-year plan, gee, I wonder if, well, okay, you're not going to be able to, yeah, no, that's not going to work. You're not going to be able to read that. But the 5-year plan is basically every 5 years, and the current one that we're in is 2015 to 2020. It gives you numerical targets to reduce emissions in the air, reduce water pollution in our water, increase trees, so reforestation, and that's just sort of environmental targets. But at a national level, we have targets, numerical targets, that are then broken down to provincial level and city level, and I've seen plans at a city level where individual government officials' names are attached to these targets. Can you imagine that if there was like a Facebook of targets that the U.S. had to reach in reducing emissions or in anything really, and your face was there with your name and you're like, you're responsible. Like that's literally your head on the screen, right? So I think one is the fact that China has these numerical targets, and year after year, the 12th 5-year plan, the 13th 5-year plan, they're quite ambitious in terms of carbon emissions, in terms of water pollution and reforestation. So as a result, China is aiming to have 15% of our energy mix from renewable energy or net zero emissions energy as compared to fossil fuels, which pollute the air. So 15% renewable energy mix by 2020, and then 20% by 2030. And if you think about that, if you just look at percentage numbers compared to maybe some other countries, like Costa Rica, I think Jose Maria Figueres told me that they're 100% renewables now. So if you just look at percentage numbers, okay, that doesn't seem so great. But actually, just because we use so much energy, that increase, 1% increase of renewables is tremendous. So I think I saw a chart where to get to 20% renewables by 2030 essentially means building the equivalent of all the energy capability in the US, except build it using net zero energy, renewables. So, I mean, that's a lot of energy. Let's see. So I talk about China's rapid green rise in 10 years because it really is from 2007 when China just created this, or not created, but released a national climate action statement, if you will, that says climate change exists. It exists, scientifically proven. Climate change exists. It's real. It's been accelerated by humans, and China needs to do its part to reduce it. And that's in 2007. So we're in 2017, only 10 years later, and we're in, let me try to paint this picture. Just, I think in the last 8 months or so living in Shanghai, I haven't had to use my air filter maybe more than 2 or 3 times. And we've been opening the windows for ventilation. I can't tell you, like, that is, oh my God, that's a totally different way of life here in China. I mean, you would like close your windows, you turn on all your air filters. I think I have at least 10 air filters in my apartment. I mean, it's not a small apartment, but still 10 air filters. How ridiculous is that? And I would show you mine, but it's my room is very cluttered, so I don't want to actually swing around the camera. So yeah, 10 air filters. I would shut the windows. I'd be afraid to go outside. If I did, I'd wear a mask. To last 8 months, I literally see blue sky. I don't wear my no masks, except for my son wanted a mask just for like a party, right? They were doing a masquerade, and as a joke, he brought air pollution masks. Teenagers. So yeah, and to open the window, I mean, every single time my IE opens the window, I'm like, oh, better check the AQI, but it's actually blue sky. It's good. It's clean air, and that's okay. So why is that so important? Other than like shock, people are shocked, right? That there's so much progress in such a short time. By the way, that's Shanghai. I wouldn't say that's every city, because Beijing was over 1,000, I think, AQI recently, mainly from, I think, desert particles. But the reason why that's so important to give credit that we can do that we can see blue sky now in Shanghai, is because everything related to pollution comes from coal plants mainly, right, or oil, and basically infrastructure, large infrastructure. And these systems, these hardware systems, take 10, 20, 30 years to build, right? So once you have that built in, your hardware, and you've got the machine of pollution going, it's really difficult to just turn it off. I mean, you'd like to think you could just turn off the factories here and there and then boom, you're done, but it doesn't actually work that way, right? Your transportation systems are designed in a certain way that you can't just shut off transport emissions. You can't just really, you can't just shut off a factory, right, if it's going, unless you have total overcapacity, which we don't. You have to move the factory somewhere else. You have to build new energy efficient ones. So on and so forth. So if you compare this to, let's say, London, if you compare this to California, Los Angeles, where I used to live in 1990, I couldn't even drive to the East LA through the mountains. I literally couldn't see the mountains on either side of the highway. That's how bad it was even in 1990 in Los Angeles. And in London, you know, back in the day when the Industrial Revolution started there was this black fog, which was smog from coal, and it killed, I mean, there was I think 4,000 coffins ordered because of that one plague of pollution, right? It took them over 100 years, I would say, to get to the point where the US and London, they have blue skies. So for the fact that China has been able to do that in 10 years, determined 10 years, after just starting to experience accelerated growth, to be able to curb that pollution, for me, that just, again, it's another sign of how determined China is to go green for its citizens, to have a livable, breathable air and safe food, safe air, safe water, safe soil for its citizens. So don't judge China's pollution or commitment to go green based on any one dot in time, any one point in time. It's really, you have to look at a trajectory, right? And you have to compare the trajectory with 10-year periods and how fast it's making progress, and compare that to other countries. So I don't know if I can show you this, but this is the slide that I like to show, which is that, you know, China just 10 years ago was this lump of black coal, and now it's you know, a smaller lump of black coal, but surrounded by this green corridor, and it's just going to get better. So I don't know. I believe in China's government that the China Dream means balancing the environmental protection even as we have slow, steady, smart growth, right? By the way, slow, steady, smart growth, efficient growth is also a great way to cut down emissions, because I don't know if you know this, but a third of all energy that's produced just disappears. It's completely wasted. So Rob Watson, one of the founders of LEED, Green Building Standards, he likened it to a bucket with holes around the bucket, right? And you're just pouring water, and the water's just whoosh, outside of the bucket. That's what we're doing when we create energy. So actually the cheapest form of energy is to save energy. It's not to use it at all. So smart growth is just, I mean, I can't how do I say this? It's really important. That's what I'm trying to say. So I thought I'd give you some facts. Sorry, these, you know, I'm going to sound very boring here, but China by 2020 is going to cap our energy consumption. So it's not percent of GDP, it's not energy intensity, it's not carbon intensity. We're capping total energy consumption, even though we don't have a prediction or magic wand to say how much energy we really need for what's the population going to be, how are we going to live lives. I mean, it's still a big question mark, right? But even in that question mark scenario, China has capped total energy consumption to 5 billion tons coal equivalent, and a cap on total coal consumption of 4.1 billion tons. Okay, so again, this is very different than what's in the 5-year plans, where it's intensity per unit GDP. So that's just like sort of changing your trajectory, your slope. Whereas this is just like, stop right there, max, right? And the total coal as a percentage of our energy mix is going to be 58%, down from 64% in 2015. So by 2020, it's going to go from 64% in 2015 to 58%. So it's coal, basically, we've peaked our carbon emissions in 2014, which is why I see blue air as a new thing. And we're going to, we've peaked our coal use, and our carbon emissions are going to peak before 2030. So the Paris Agreement, if you follow these things, China said that we would peak our carbon emissions or CO2 emissions by 2030, but we're actually going to be doing that a lot sooner. And it's because we've stopped increasing coal. So China has committed to shutting over 1,000 coal mines, over 100 coal plants, meaning like the ones that were going to be in construction or some of that are in construction, those count within the, like, let's say 130 coal plants, plus or minus. So, for people who are still quoting things like, oh, we're building, 2 coal plants a week or something like that, really old statistics, China literally is a new country every 5 years. So you have to look at what's happening now. Oh, I don't know if this is going to, this is my chart of energy use being decoupled from economic growth. So, I don't know if you can see that, but, oh well, boring charts anyway. The other things that I have been talking about in Norway recently is, India, for example, just announced that solar is now cheaper than coal. So they're stopping new coal plants, apparently. Solar is now cheaper than coal plants. Okay, so one, that's huge, right? We knew this was happening. Not only are solar panel prices going down, but we think that energy storage prices are going to halve this year, right? So, so you have solar, which is strong in the day. You have wind, which is strong at night, right? So the solar and wind, right? Sorry, I can't do waves with fingers, but solar and wind together are a great renewable, almost unlimited energy supply for us. But one of the issues that we've had is lack of affordable, large-scale energy storage, or like big batteries, right? But this year, the prices for energy storage is coming down. I've seen some really interesting lithium-ion batteries at North Shipping, where Norway is launching 9 new ferry fleets. There's going to be one from Denmark to Sweden also, just based on electricity. I was talking to people about how new ports in China are going to be completely electrified. Completely electrified. So you can see like electric forklifts, I forget what the terminology is, but RNG or something like that. Anyway, big heavy machinery. You're going to drive it along the ground in induction charging, right? So you're basically going to charge your battery as you drive along the port. So imagine all of this shifting our use of fossil fuels, right? Because transport, things that go choo-choo, basically they're all powered by oil and now increasingly LNG gas. But if it's electric, if we're completely electrifying these ports, and I showed some really cute videos of little robots and pictures of like JD.com, one of our largest online retailers, wants to develop a drone that can carry 1 ton of equipment. And of course that drone is powered by electricity. So we're moving towards a different future, right? Definitely off oil. And you know, LNG, they're trying hard, but honestly, it's cleaner than oil, but it's not as clean as net zero emissions renewable energy. And as we are able to put more solar and more wind onto the electrical grid to juice up these ports and the EVs and municipal fleets, driverless cars in China definitely by 2030. You know, BMW, spoken by BMW and Mercedes. We're just going to have a different future. So again, pricing, that's sort of what I was focusing on in this long ramble. Pricing just makes sense not to do coal anymore. And then the other announcement that came out last week was from Sempra Energy. A vice president of Sempra Energy said that we now technically can have an electrical grid that is 100% fed on intermittent energy, so like solar and wind, right? And this is huge because when I was working in smart grid, meaning in 2007, our first project at JUCCCE was to bring in this concept, smart grid, into China. And the reason why we did that, the urging of Steve Papermaster, who at the time worked for George Bush in the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology as the head of Clean Energy Committee. He was one of my co-founders. And he said, you know, the one biggest impact thing that you can do is bring this concept of smart grid to revolutionize the grid in China. So maybe I'll ramble about that a little bit. This is sort of really long, but smart grid does what the internet did to landlines, to the electrical grid, right? So the electrical grid, the transmission lines just push coal-fired power, electricity to you in your home, right, or business or factory. But it didn't really, there was nothing coming back. There's no information coming back. What smart grid did was it allowed every single node, every single piece of equipment to talk to each other back and forth. So, you know, if you're in the middle of suburbia and your power line goes down, you used to have to just wait in darkness in the US, I would say. Wait in total darkness until some truck comes along, you call, right, and some truck comes along and fixes it. But now, they know automatically, they receive a signal that something's wrong and they can reroute electricity if needed. That's just one example. But my point is that when I was working on bringing this concept of smart grid into China, which has revolutionized the grid here, maybe I'll talk about that a little bit later in a different Facebook video. But my point is that people were saying, oh, if you have more than 20% of the energy mix, the electricity mix on the grid, more than 20% to come from intermittent energy or like non-stable energy, which is solar and wind, then the technology couldn't handle it. It would just like go crazy. It wouldn't know what to do. So therefore, you need steady thermal power or coal plants as a base load, and then you can add little tiny bits of solar and wind, right? But on top of this huge base load, right? Because what you want to do is avoid blackouts. So that was 2007. And this is 2017, just 10 years from now, from then. And we now, according to Sempra Energy, have technology to have 100% grids that are based on, grids that are 100% based on renewables. So what that means is we can completely come off of base loads like coal or even nuclear, right? So, you know, okay, so we've got pricing. The pricing for renewables is going down, and it'll keep going down. And then you've got no need for base loads on grids. And then you've got the situation in China where we just have overcapacity of coal plants. So we're not using as much energy as the coal plants could provide. And so you have this economic driver to say, hey, you're using too much money to maintain these coal plants, or we don't need to build new ones for $50 million each over X number of years. You know, why are we doing this? It just doesn't make economic sense to invest in coal anymore. So overcapacity of electricity versus the demand that we're actually using in China is also a key driver of what's happening today in this, you know, against this backdrop of a delusional I'm not going to rant. Okay, so the other thing is that you've got oil prices going bloop. Unfortunately, my pictures of it are on the phone, so I can't actually show you the pictures of the charts, but I think I posted it on Facebook just before this. So I was just speaking at ONS literally the morning before I left Norway, so I haven't had much sleep between then and now, but there was the VP of the big oil majors, and D&B Bank, an oil analyst, the largest bank in that area, and a former oil magnate in Norway who's now completely gone like Al Gore, and he's like, no oil, and I'm investing in green stuff, and so anyway, we were talking, and VP of Statoil said that right now their energy mix, so the VP of Statoil said right now their current portfolio is 5% mainly offshore wind, so renewables mainly offshore wind. But he would really like to find enough projects to invest in that are large enough to make you know, investment sense for them, to go from 5% of their portfolio to 50%. So this is an oil company saying that they're trying to move to renewables. And why is that? Oh, he showed beautiful pictures of 6 different huge, like the hugest offshore wind projects in the world that they're invested in. You know, why is that? Well, the oil prices are just tanking, right? And if you look, there was a chart that I posted on Facebook that shows a bunch of different reports that guess what the oil prices are going to be between now and 2019. They're sort of all over the area, but they sort of follow this one big funnel, and it's either, you know, totally flat, like D&B's just sort of plays it safe and says, okay, the price is going to be flat, or it's just going to totally tank. So Citi and Goldman Sachs have totally tanked prices, right? So what this means is all these oil companies are like, oh, well, we can't do new drilling because it just doesn't make sense, right? Very, very few new projects make money without subsidies. Sorry, that's key, without subsidies. And I mean, right now it costs them money just to maintain the well there. So they're all looking to move out from you know, drilling in the seas there, looking towards other projects like renewables. And interesting enough, like the thing that gave me so much hope, ONS is the largest convener of oil and gas companies at these huge events. Their next meeting, forum, is going to be around the word innovation, and it's going to be August 2018. And they asked me, you know, what is something that you would advise them to do, or to you know, sort of fulfill this word innovation, right? Meaning, how do you dig yourself out of this hole, this disruption hole, right? And you know, to me, it seemed quite simple that they should be bringing in more diverse thoughts, meaning people from different industries, different geographies, different genders, and then doing hackathons. Like, you know, most of the tech industry, that's a common word, but seemed like an alien word in that industry. So hackathons, rapid prototyping. I just learned from my friend Tom Chi, when we were both at Unreasonable Impact, mentoring startups in Malaysia. So I just got a little Twitter from Chris F. Thank you for watching my BBC interview or listening to it on radio. What was I going to say? So I was really hopeful because they were like, oh, this sounds great. You know, let's talk more about these hackathons and rapid prototyping and things like that. I'm like, wow, shipping and oil could really use a lot of these innovative thinking processes that are disrupting the internet industry over and over on a daily basis, bring those into the oil industry because they want to go green, I think, like some of these companies, right? They want to go green. They want to know how to take their existing capabilities, like mainly drilling, and then pivot to something else, right? So they talk about offshore wind, they talk about carbon capture sequestration, but what else? What else is there? Who knows? There's all sorts of things when you look at tech that just sort of surprise you. Like, remember the 3-comb Post-it notes, right? He was making glue and came up with failure glue, and that came up with Post-it notes, which is, sliced bread of office stationery. Well, I was just talking to Blue Wave Ocean Energy, and it's a startup in China, and the technology is from this academician, a professor here in China, and he was working on wave energy, and he claims to have technology. Hi, Nat, from Kenya. I didn't know you lived in Kenya, but hello. So he was talking about technology that they now have. They're trying to get investors that takes wave energy from $6,000 to $2,000 to install. And the reason is because they don't need foundations in the sea, right, which are really expensive to build, to sort of anchor them in any one place. And my point is that innovation can come from anywhere. You're trying to invent one thing and you invent something very useful, but for a totally different purpose. So as he was inventing this really cheap, efficient wave energy technology, which is yet to be commercialized, they're looking for investors, Blue Wave Ocean Energy, what he did was he said, well, I've got to have a solution to remove all these barnacles and slime from grabbing onto my technology in the ocean. Right, and so he invented something called, like, this anti-fouling, it's called, right, to remove all the live stuff, wanting to suck onto your hardware in the ocean, mainly barnacles. So he invented this thing which is based on sound, which totally makes sense if you've done any research on sound. But so, like, small distances, he just releases a certain frequency which repels the barnacles, and I don't know if it works with slime yet. I should ask them. But this is a problem which causes 40% of energy inefficiency in ships. So, in other words, 40% of energy that's used for the shipping industry is lost because of the drag of, imagine this like bed of barnacles on the bottom on your hull, right? The U.S. Navy apparently spends $600 million each year just like scraping off and doing what have you to these poor barnacles, living creatures which didn't know any better, right? But sound, it just like repels it. It's like, and but it's short distance sound, right? It is 24/7, but it's electricity, so it's not gonna take too much energy as compared to the current technologies of like paint, which have stuff that repels the barnacles, and copper and what have you. So my point is that maybe what we can do is bring hackathons and rapid prototyping and all this disruptive thinking, diverse, innovative, disruptive thinking processes from the internet industry into the oil and shipping industries to help them, pivot their technologies and capabilities to something that is much more friendlier for the planet, yet also makes money. So, let's see, Sam, will the Ministry of Environmental Protection have more power enough to prosecute the industrial wells closely linked to local governments? Well, so in 2015, China had published, I think, the new environmental protection law, like 2.0. And I did this huge report on it, actually. So what's amazing is that this new environmental protection law gives power to NGOs, let's say, individuals, to sue companies and governments. So there are already cases of And the government has actually given NGOs, they've pointed the fingers to, this is who you should sue. We're going to let you win so you can create a case to show everybody else that they can do it too. Like, that's how it worked. Crazy. But so what's happening is that China is now enforcing environmental protection through its laws and through fines. So one of the interesting things about the new environmental protection law is that it fines not only the companies that are blowing smoke into the air, but on a continual basis until they fix the problem. So it's not a one-time fine, it's like daily basis. And even more importantly, the individuals who head those organizations can also be sued and fined and prosecuted, right? So that's pretty scary. And that was a really, really big jump for China in terms of environmental protection. Now, I mean, there's a lot of things that need to come together before we prosecute more quickly and more transparently and more effectively, all sorts of things. So things like Majun's blue map that shows you where the factories are, the major factories, and then if they're red, it means that they're polluting beyond the standards. Transparency, big data, mapping, all that stuff, you know, those are all things that need to happen to help the law basically prosecute. You need to build up environmental legal capabilities within China as well. Like, somebody needs to teach the lawyers what are the precedences in other countries and how do those apply to China. So anyway, I sort of took a question, but so my point is, I'm talking about my reaction, my response to Trump's decision to pull out of the International Climate Change Accord in Paris. And I mean, I have so many points, but part of it is that for China, the train has way left the station, right? So it really doesn't matter what the U.S. does at this point, because in about 2010, I noticed this huge shift in attitudes towards looking up to the U.S. As this big brother to learn from and get best practices from, and shifting to Europe, right? Looking at countries like Germany, especially as they do distributed rooftop solar, distributed generation, Netherlands for wind, and Israel for water, and I know that's not Europe, but my point is that the looking abroad, away from the U.S. since 2010 already. So this is just what Trump did, this decision. It's not like a new direction per se, but what it does is it takes all these watercolors, these oil colors, and it paints this image of the U.S. failing, frankly, and puts a nice gold, fancy, gilded, you know why, frame around this image. And images are so important. They're so important in terms of creating the future that we want, right? Whether it's good or bad, whether it's you want it or Trump wants it, right? But the point is that to lead the world, you need to paint this picture, this image, and that's essentially what he's doing. He's painting this image. So to combat this, yes, we need all this tech, we need finance and blah, 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 but fundamentally we need to paint this image in people's hearts of a cleaner, greener, more sustainable lifestyle, or, you know, just this beautiful nature of people growing but not using and consuming without limits. It's about appreciating the soil from which our food grows. It's how personal health is. We need to call in the bards, we need to call in the musicians, the songwriters, the movie script writers, the TV show producers, to really paint this beautiful picture of how we could have dense cities where people are walking and doing bike share and using subway or using Hyperloop one day, passive maglev. We need to show these images of growing food together and sharing it as green vegetables versus, sorry, that was a little rant. So in 2010, JUCCCE started this project exactly to do that called the China Dream. And we brought in storytellers, the ad agencies, sustainability experts, and then cultural experts in China to paint this picture of what a China Dream could look like that is, ultimately ended up with, we are trying to build a livable China together, right? So we're moving from survivability, basic survivability, safe food, air, and water, to livability, to walkable neighborhoods, beautiful green everywhere, to thrivability, which is about individual personal prosperity, personal health and wealth. And this image was so compelling, we were able to get a lot of the press behind it, that Xi Jinping used it when he came into office in 2012 in his big speech. And it's like the China Dream now is hand in hand. It's smart growth, smart, steady economic growth with environmental protection, meaning like livable livability for us, but also for our future generations. It's also about working together hand in hand with other nations. It's not about, America first. No. It's not about China first. It's not about Europe first. It's not about anybody first. It's about everybody working together in a new collaborative vision of the future and collaboratively creating this connected future. So the Belt and Road, I think I'm going to stop here because I'm sort of tired and delirious from travel, but I'll do a Belt and Road Facebook Live at some point as well. But this new vision of the future of 65 different countries, big and small, working together to connect each other at trade routes, energy routes, cultural routes, economic routes, diplomatic routes, all together, working together towards one vision versus any one country first. I mean, the future, the planet, the livelihoods of us all now just transcend national boundaries. So it's really, I would say that's my main point, my main response to the Trump decision to exit the Paris Agreement is that the future is connected, the future is together, the future is collaborative. So, more later. Boy, I've been rambling. Thank you so much for anybody who's actually been listening this entire time. That's incredible for you. Like, whoo, patience. Thank you. Bye.